Hello, doers, builders, and shapers of tomorrow. You're all conductors of the world of work. Welcome to the Workestration Podcast. Hi, Stella. Welcome back.
Good to see you, Donna. Hi.
So good to see you. So, team, hello, doers, builders, and shapers of tomorrow. Welcome back to the Workestration Podcast. We have another shaper this week. We're really excited. His name is Steve Gargiulo. He has spent the last 15 years working on large-scale organizational culture change at big companies like Johnson & Johnson, Chevron, Sanofi, and Mars. First as the head of creative engagement inside J&J, and now as the CEO of Cultivate, a 30-person boutique consultancy focused on building thriving cultures at science-led companies. Outside of big company culture, Steve loves chocolate milk and the Ghostbusters theme song.
Let's dive in.
Steve, welcome to the Workestration Podcast. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. Honored to be joined by two incredible people. So excited for the conversation.
We're so excited too. We're just going to dive into it. So for Cultivate, we know that Cultivate works on many things and you and your team work on many things. But what are some of the areas you focus on most to help science-led companies really stay ready for the macro environment and the changing technology?
Yeah, at Cultivate, our focus is on building thriving cultures. And if you think about what goes into thriving cultures, it's 8 million different kinds of things, right? So if you think about almost this like cascade of things that you need, like, well, the organization needs a purpose. Okay, do we have that? Is that clear? If so, move on to the next one. If not, like, hey, is there some room there? We need a business strategy. Do we have that? Is it clear? Do we have whatever, right? Okay. Do we have values? Do we have that? Are those clear? Are those just like the things on the wall? Or are those like the actual lived ones that we're, shooting for kind of stuff? Do we have behaviors? Are they behaviors? Sorry, innovation doesn't count. That's not a behavior. Can you see it in a comic strip? Could you see someone do it? Then it's like, okay, an observable behavior, whatever. So if you imagine kind of like ticking down from like the things that you quote unquote need to have a thriving culture, our focus is largely just trying to take a first principles perspective on addressing those kinds of things to make sure that we're then helping an organization get into the spot that it needs to be in. So just a couple quick examples. So imagine like a 15,000 person biotech company that's founder led, that's never had to actually codify any of these kinds of things or put them down on paper. It's taking the time to do that and then setting up leadership expectations and then building up the kinds of leadership development programming that we want to be able to be successful, and making sure that we get to do that in a really modern way, because we don't have to do that with legacy constructs of, well, we should have a residency for 3 days and do this and have coaching and an assessment. No, there are myriad different ways that we can do this, including agents supporting people and having more social learning and just doing things that just feels much more fresh and normal and human. And so we'll get to do things like that. We'll get to do things like, hey, how are we developing successors for head of R&D for a massive company, and what are the kinds of experiences that they need? We're going to take you to India and take you to China and put you on a board and do a program on a plane and whatever kinds of things to help support you to be successful. Fortune 5 energy company thinking about how do we develop AI capabilities for the future for leaders and practitioners in the workforce. So it's broad ranging, but our team at Cultivate has strategy and culture people, IO people, and then experience designers, people who can be really focused on creating goosebump moments and shining eyes and the kinds of things that I think make people want to be part of work and recognize the privilege and the opportunity that we have when we work for a great company. We can make a great impact when we choose to do so. And I think that's one of the best things about working with people is helping them see those opportunities that they have ahead of them.
I feel like a big thing, obviously, Stella and I talk to people about is AI and transformation, but I think at the root of it, it's all about how do you continuously evolve and stay ahead of kind of what's coming in the macro environment. What are the signals for you and your team when you walk into a company, just generalizations, of course, of when you feel organizations are on the sphere of more ready versus, let's say, less ready for change? That could be AI. Obviously, I think that's one that people are talking about a lot, but I think in general, the more ready and evolved you are, you will be already thinking about these things. So are there any signals that you kind of look for in those first conversations?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think in some ways, I think everyone's always ready for change. They're just ready for different kinds of change. They're ready for the change that they want. They're ready for the change that's their idea. They're ready for the change that they think should happen. But they, looking up in the org, they just don't get it yet. They're not there yet. If only they got it, I would be successful, right? So it becomes like, I listen a lot for that they word versus the we word. So that bows will often be if we talk about like little signals, thinking about, is this the kind of person who's going to take responsibility to create a massive change in the organization? Or is this the kind of person who only believes they have agency to do a small thing that will shape likely the kind of solution that will work with them on in terms of their ability to do something? But at any given moment, everything's always changing. I think it's just a matter of like, hey, how are we going to go about this? How much political capital are you willing to spend? How much are you willing to work to bring people on board for this? And do you recognize that you're not just creating a bunch of PowerPoint slides and going to a bunch of meetings, but you're trying to shape a movement here? And what does it mean to shape a movement? And you have to win hearts and minds. And there's just like work that maybe you never had the chance to do, even though you're a VP and you've been here 25 years and you theoretically on paper have had all of these experiences of what leadership is. Maybe you haven't really had the chance to lead something that's going to create this kind of long lasting impact. And so I think trying to help folks with that kind of mindset shift is really important. Because even that kind of language that I just used, how that could get distilled down or codified for people is like, oh, you should have change champions and have a network of people. You can do things in such a rigid, technically it checks all the box, you're doing the right things kind of way. But a network, quote unquote, network of people who are doing you a favor, supposedly sending an email on your behalf, that's going to do absolutely nothing. Being really thoughtful about like, no, a movement really means accomplishing something together that we can't accomplish alone, like a group of people gathered together around a common interest, moving in a strategic direction that they're bought into, right? There's work to be done there that is difficult, meaningful work. And the level of passion and energy and commitment my team can bring is super high, but the level of internal championship required is higher because nothing will ever successfully be driven from the outside. It can be enabled and supported and, hey, we're going to work our butts off to make sure that we help you do it. But I can't bring more to it than you're bringing to it, or it's not going to be successful.
Can we double click on that? Because I think I hear a lot of recommendations to start with a network of champions when it comes to AI transformation. Find the people, it's a bottoms up change. You find people who are comfortable with technology. They are early adopters. They have influence and good network inside the company, and you just empower them. How what you're doing is different. What are the listeners should pick from the stories, because you're really at the forefront of that change.
Yeah. Everything you said sounds right to me and sounds good, right? I think one of the latest studies is something like 90% of people in most organizations are already using the tools, but in 80% of their use cases, it's not use cases that are like allowed or permissive. So they're kind of doing it very much under the table. And I know I'm supposed to use our internal tool, but I'm just having ChatGPT write performance reviews for my team because I can't bear to sit and write them. And so it's one thing to say, yes, we'll get people out of the woodwork. I wonder, depending on who's assembling them, what's the incentive for them to participate, what voice are they going to have in the change? Are people really coming out of the woodwork around stuff and being honest or not? Because I think what I've seen in a lot of places is people say, well, we've called for people and these are the few people who raise their hand. Okay, but is that really representative? Are you giving people immunity if they step forward and say, these are the tools that I'm using, and say, I'm going to give you a seat at the table at setting the strategy on this? And that stuff's really hard because we have this law team and ethics team that's on stuff. And so they're going to tell them they have to stop doing this thing right away. And in some cases, these legal teams that have been assembled around this stuff are actually not super competent or qualified. They're just saying no a lot. And I get that's sometimes their job, but probably not precisely their job. And so a lot of organizations, I just don't think are approaching this super well. I think what a genuine accomplishment of what you just said, Stella, would be having genuine representation of, here's the stuff that's going on in the org right now, warts and all. Here are the people who are doing things, and here are the challenges that they're fighting on this. Here's somebody who is supposed to create the easiest freaking thing in the world, which is some kind of Ask HR tool. And for whatever reason, people still can't get the answer on how much I'm allowed to spend for dinner when I'm traveling. Why is that answer wrong? Well, a million reasons, because what it's looking for on SharePoint is a bunch of crap. And there's the answer here and there's the answer here. And maybe in those two places it's right. But did you know that actually in your master service agreements with all of your vendors, you have what they're allowed to spend on dinner, and you have 10,000 copies of that document in your SharePoint. And so because you have all those different MSAs in there, it's going to assume that because I see that so prevalently, that must be the right answer. And so people aren't spending time training, cleaning up all the crap that exists in people's infrastructure is just littered with nonsense to be able to do this kind of stuff really well. And of course, we're not going to be able to solve these challenges when the part of me that says, well, it's not enough to do it would be like, if you're still going to do all this other stuff really poorly, then just bringing together a group of people that meet once a month does absolutely nothing. Are they genuinely empowered to start making change? How are you only bringing together the right people who actually want to do a bunch of work around it too? So it's like, some people just want to get together and complain. I don't need them in my change network. I need people who say, like, are you ready to sign up to do a lot of work? Are you ready to sign up to give a lot of your political and social capital towards this work? All right, well, then let's go do it together and let's get on this journey. But that requires genuine leadership, which requires risk-taking, which requires just a lot of things. But I think when those are in place, you start to have more successful movements around people starting to change policy, change behaviors, say, yeah, we actually don't care about just making a bunch of like fancy looking PDFs for stuff. We're going to start training. We're going to put all of our comms team on creating black text on white paper instructions that is training our LLMs to answer stuff correctly. Well, that requires very different capabilities in our comms teams, very different kinds of people. They probably don't agree because they have their own point of view on what they should be doing.
So what's interesting in what you're describing is pretty much the whole context of the work environment of the business has to change. It's really about changing the mission, vision, getting clear on how that lives in policies and process documentation, in politics that gets enacted in how decisions are being made. And now you have a new player, a lot of the AI that is part of that decision making. So on one side, we hear arguments that AI can do a lot of the technical stuff and routinized stuff, and it's not about the creative part. Humans should still make the decision. Based on the experience and examples of customers that you worked with, what is really human decision making, or what people think they're going to continue to make decisions versus where we are underestimating the capabilities of AI to do that?
Yeah, I think the vast majority of people are still highly underestimating the capabilities for decision making. I haven't seen, so it's a really good question because I was trying to think what's a good example of a type of decisions that I've seen an organization outsource to AI or give to AI. And I can't immediately out the top of my head think about a super valuable set of decisions that they've allowed AI to make. What I do think some leading organizations are doing is recognizing that the things that in the past I might have paid McKinsey or BCG or somebody a lot to do, hey, let's do a SWOT analysis on threats to the business, or let's think about what could be new business models or things for us to go after. I do think there are some leading organizations who are using AI to help them do some of those kinds of things. Because in the past, if all McKinsey did was hand you a bunch of slides on that anyway, and hey, we love McKinsey and McKinsey has a role, and so I'm using that, metaphorically somewhat. But the idea is like AI can do that kind of thing really well. And so that kind of strategic thought partnership and support and future casting, I think people who are using AI to do that are much more well-informed as they're making decisions, because AI is not a partner on that. It's 75 different partners in it.
But when you think about even yourself, you are a boutique firm with 30 talented people who can probably do a lot of projects that previously used to take a lot more and a lot more expensive consultants from those companies that you're describing. So it is about productivity to some degree, right? It enhanced your ability and your domain expertise and put it on steroids with very high velocity to create a lot more content and enablement than previously you would be able to do. And everybody now claims that AI is increasing everyone's productivity. Do you think we have blind spots when it comes to some of these productivity claims? And what should companies think about when that's the end that they pursue?
Well, what a high stakes question, because of course we have blind spots, but you're assuming that I somehow maybe could diagnose what they are more than other people. And I definitely have a ton of blind spots. So I don't know. What I would say is I think there's blind spots generally when we talk about these kinds of things around people understanding that at any given moment, whatever AI you're working with is adopting some kind of persona. You've either chosen to give it that persona or it's chosen one for itself. And so we talked about prompting, like that kind of thing. And then also just helping people. I think people have blind spots around just the amount of revisions you should be doing with things, the amount of back and forth. If we take the classic, and I'll mention it multiple times because what I see in our clients is like this performance management use case is one of the most popular, especially this time of year. We're recording this in December. Like people are focused very much on this and they're like outsourcing their performance management. And there's a lot of disgust from HR people. Oh my God, I can't believe they're doing that. To some degree, I understand that. But also, do you understand why people are doing that? Is because your process is cumbersome and it's hard and it's difficult and people are bad at doing it. So actually, AI is really good at solving some of those problems if it's not a write the performance review for me for this person. But if instead you're able to engage in some conversation and the AI is prompting you around things like, yeah, tell me about a time when you really saw this person perform well in this situation, or tell me about a time that the weakness. Oh, can you tell me more about that? Is that a common pattern? How have you talked about this before? It can actually coach you to be the best performance manager you've ever been in your life. I think there are still blind spots around some of those kinds of things. And so organizations are writing blanket policies that are encouraging people to just go behind the shadows of writing other stuff. And so we're living in a mixed reality universe right now, I think. And then we have all the tools in the HR tech stack that say they have AI turned on as part of them that I wonder what actually is AI in that or not. And you have organizations trying to make decisions, which kudos to HR tech people. It's very difficult, or the HR IT people. But, oh, we want to go all in with this because then everything will be connected. It's okay, great. But how does this work? I don't have a really great example of a company whose HR tech stack isn't a mess. I think every company, we work with some of the world's best companies, and they all have a lot of challenges, a lot of work to do. And part of that's just the constant change. Of course they do, because stuff is changing all the time. But I think it's a really hard space to get right and to do right.
Yeah, I feel like a big problem that, and this isn't just my own thoughts, but on a lot of studies recently, of very famous one, MIT, of 95% of pilots have been failing using AI. I think a big one is because, and you already mentioned it, the inside data is not organized, or what we would call like tagged well, which makes it hard to translate into any kind of learning for an LLM, or even just an automation. I don't even think sometimes we need an LLM. I think sometimes we just need to automate in the people HR space. And then all models are private, right? We don't really have great examples of open source LLMs. There are some that exist, but there aren't a lot inside organizations, if any. And so I think it perpetuates the problem that you just said, that a lot of HR people are trying to solve. I think 10 years ago, the big conversation was, I want a learning experience that's like Netflix. And then quickly we learned two things. A, Netflix is a lot more fun than the training that you need to do inside of a company. So the speed of customer behavior is way faster. And then second, their data is obviously, is just so much better. I see a lot of parallels into the way that a lot of thought leaders are thinking about AI inside organizations and forgetting kind of the points you just made, Steve.
Well, and it's interesting because if and when we only focus on productivity, which is a great use case and there's massive opportunity in productivity, but productivity exists on a plane with, like you mentioned, automation. Essentially, productivity is just a margin play. So there's automation would be ahead of using AI. There's work happening in different parts of the world, which would be ahead of automation. And so in parallel, every people function and HR function is still fighting for margin, and some doing something somewhere along that plane of using global capability centers or outsourcing parts of their work, or focus on automation or focus on AI. And it's more so ands than I's, right? I think part of it is this, all these transformations happening at the same time. It's not business as usual, it's transformation as usual. And so in a world where just we're constantly going through all of these transformations, how are we keeping up with these kinds of things? How are we setting ourselves up for success? And that's why also I think a lot of HR leaders who come from a predominantly HR background and have never done the work to build the business acumen and build the strategic thinking, I think are really struggling in this context because the transactional parts of being an HRBP don't matter. Sorry. It's really hard. Just those are less important to the organization. And so the HR leaders who are listening to the earnings call, who can go into a 10K and go into an annual report, understand what's happening, hear what the activist investors were just asking about, and understand how that's going to relate to business strategy, and understand how that's going to relate to what I need to do to support people or develop people or build process, I think are the ones who are most successful in this landscape. And it just means a radical change for a lot of people who've grown up in this function with the mindset that, well, I need to be a good business partner. I just need to listen and I need to solve problems. And that's part of it, like being a good partner, but like that ain't enough.
But I think the other point you made earlier that we keep circling around is this importance of having those technical skills to be able to grapple with the tech stack. Because indeed, HR's complexity quotient, I think, when it comes to our technology, just got so out of hand. And we see some of these trends where the IT and HR leadership is being merged, right? We see more expectations of analytical capabilities and technical savviness from HR. Are your customers actually talking about some of those trends and potential for merging some of the capabilities? Or is there a new type of role that is emerging where you have somebody technically savvy, good understanding of HR, straddling the two worlds to bring them together to transform the technology, the experience of workers, integrate the data, resolve that complexity?
Yeah, and I'd be curious what you see too, because most of my clients are really big companies, so they're not going to be first movers in this. It's going to take a while for them to get there in terms of their function. Of course, companies have invested a lot within their HR functions and these people analytics functions that have continued to grow. And you have a lot more biopsychologists, you have a lot more data scientists coming into those groups, and then they're exporting talent from those data analytics groups into other parts of the HR function. And you're seeing more data literacy, I think, across the board there. But in terms of what you've described as this new layer, these new roles of how are IT and HR working together, I will say there's a pretty massive company that actually integrated those functions in a way that was interesting that I'd never seen before, of basically saying that our IT and our people team are essentially looking after the same thing. I guess like in many companies, if you have finance and legal and kind of support functions together, but this was almost on a different plane where they're saying like our tech is almost like our people, and you can look at our tech on our org chart like you look at our people on our org chart, and we think about kind of how are those things working together. But I don't know, I don't have necessarily any specific model that I've seen of people who are doing that really well. I do think there's a level of technical acumen that more and more organizations are starting to develop as part of leadership development. So just like you're learning feedback skills and how to have difficult conversations, you're learning how to be able to prompt well, how to be able to select tools, how to be able to do that kind of work, because that's just like the new expectation. We just did a leadership development program where we brought in a CEO of a one-person agency who they're making $50 million in annual revenue as a one-person agency.
Wow.
And so you have a group of VPs who are used to like gnashing teeth about getting headcount to be able to have 200 people in their group that can't hold a candle to that revenue, or they don't even know what revenue is. There's an interesting shift happening when people start to really understand, how do I get a massive amount of stuff done in a way that is enabling and unlocking the business strategy, which means it's exciting times, but it does also mean that there's a lot of really smart, really capable, really well-paid, rich people in big cities working for big companies that maybe should be more fearful for their jobs than they are. I just got back from 2 weeks in India, and I've previously lived in India. And every time I'm there, I'm just like blown away by the talent density and talent quality and the amount of people that are going to be coming for those big, cushy executive jobs from different places in the world. Is everyone has to be ready to step up their game and work hard, which makes it fun times, but also wild times.
I was thinking of an example. Sorry, I was just reflecting on Stella's question. I know ServiceNow, and I cannot remember the pharmaceutical company who combined tech and people, but I know ServiceNow recently did. And so I think that to me is kind of almost a lagging trend, because I feel like 10 years ago we were talking about the product mindset inside of people function. And I think we're finally getting there. But I think it complements what you're saying, Steve, which is not having the mindset of you are a task doer and receiving questions all day, very much the part of HR we can automate, but rather really thinking the end to end of why is everything broken? How do we make it better, et cetera. But it leads me into where I'd love to pivot, which is more on the culture work, not only that you've done, but that you do. Because I think it's something that I've had the privilege to hear you speak and talk about this topic. And it's an area that I consider you probably certainly an expert, but I think one of my favorites. So I'd love to hear, what do you think is HR's role in shaping culture? But before we even get there, how would you define organizational culture? I know it's a big question, but I'd love your take on it.
Yeah, some of my favorite frames on culture are people like us do things like this. We get to decide who the people like us are, or culture is what we celebrate and what we tolerate. So sometimes those kind of little mental models help. I think the reality is in a massive organization, there exist many subcultures. And so there's an aspirational version of our enterprise culture or kind of our centralized culture. But the reality is each of us can set and does set subcultures around us. And when we recognize that and recognize that everything that we do every day is creating the culture around us, cool. So I want to be more intentional about that. I want to be a role model for that in the organization. And I want to help people to be able to do that in a way that's consistent with us achieving our goals. Great. It doesn't matter what the words on the wall are, right? If we're not living into it. I guess at the end of the day, when I think about culture, is like, who changes culture? Whoever decides to, right? Whoever wants to take responsibility for it. And because there are many different subcultures, we can think about that from a few different levels of abstraction in terms of there's a subculture on my team, there's a subculture in my group, there's a subculture in my organization, but there are also subcultures as it relates to what is our culture of innovation? What is our culture of inclusion? What is our culture of AI? So there are so many different ways to slice culture that it's really about being intentional to say, okay, what is it that I'm trying to shape now? I'm trying to create culture of X, or I'm trying to create this kind of culture in my team. How is it experienced now? What are we celebrating? What are we tolerating? Or what are the things like this that we're doing? And then what do I want to start to do a little bit differently? And I think focusing much more on the behaviors, focusing much more on experimenting and doing stuff versus spending 6 months doing PowerPoint slides and we're going to interview a bunch of leaders. That kind of stuff can have its place. And so I'm only being slightly facetious because there'll be clients listening who are like, hey, we paid you to interview our leaders. What do you mean you shouldn't do that? Yes, that's part of it. But there's a lot of culture theater work that happened, which is we're going to spend time on some of the navel gazing around what we think it should be, and we're going to feel good, and we're going to print some new t-shirts. What really matters is when people start showing up differently, leading differently, and empowering people around the kinds of things that we want to do. And those are the leaders that I have a ton of time for and a ton of respect for and a ton of faith in, because when they recognize that, hey, my behaviors help shape this, and here's how I'm experimenting, here's how I'm holding myself accountable to experiment, here's the cycle with which I'm doing that, here's the data that I'm using to do that, to understand what's happening, then it's like, yeah, culture doesn't have to be this big thing that is somebody else's job, which is so often the case as how many leaders think. Culture is somebody else's problem. It's a they, back to the they thing. They in HR don't get it, or they, the CEO doesn't get it, or they. You are they. And what are you doing to affect this? And how are you showing up every day with your big paycheck to work to make this kind of thing happen?
What's interesting in what you're describing is technology has changed. The problems that typical workplaces encounter are still the same. We still need leadership. We still need accountability. We still need people who say, I'm the throat to choke. I'll take the leading role here, and that leadership can show up at any level. The interesting, when you were talking about earlier, helping companies to think about succession planning, we now have digital agents, digital workers, and will they also have succession plans for the agents? And how do we develop them, as in the agents, and how they behave and how they make decisions and the type of suggestions and the voice of the culture that gets represented through them? I don't know if HR is really prepared to engage in some of that, but I think that's one of the most important roles HR can play to really shape this emerging culture that gets experienced through the digital workers.
Yeah, I grew up in the work. I was at Johnson & Johnson for 8 years. And so you have this mindset when you grow up in a certain way of what it means to work inside a big company or what it means to work inside HR. And then getting a chance to work outside as a consultant, it's a totally different set of muscles where you're trying to understand a problem, but there's this power dynamic of, yes, dear client, what you need, and you're so wise and wonderful, and thank you for writing me a check. But you also have to develop the skills as a really strong thought partner and someone who's going to elevate them and someone who's going to coach them. And so you're developing all these kinds of skills as a consultant. I wish I had when I was working inside in HR. So a lot of those kinds of skill sets as well, because that same power dynamic actually is there. Yes, dear business partner, you're so right. Or those consultative skills or those business acumen skills. I think the more us HR folks can spend time building those kinds of skills and being a thought partner, instead of just complaining about, why don't we have a seat at the table? Make your seat at the table. Do the work to get there. If you do all the hard work, steps 1 through 4,999, you make that train leave the station, no one's going to stop it. People want to be on board. They're going to say they've been supportive of it. I think agency, tenacity, personal responsibility to say, I'm going to deeply learn the business. I'm going to deeply understand what these issues are. And I'm going to work to advocate for how to help you do this in a way that's going to support our people. I always see those kinds of HR leaders and people leaders be successful.
I think a little bit diving into human machine models for a little bit, just because it's something that we love to talk about. Stella and I were wondering, what do you think are the first steps for an organization or the workforce in general? It doesn't need to be a specific company where humans and AI coexist meaningfully. So we talked a lot about productivity, but I'd like to also, with this question, put aside productivity, because I often think we think of that lens, but I'm not sure productivity is the only, value of AI. In fact, I actually think many times it's the wrong one to think about. So would love any thoughts.
Yeah. Again, big question. The degree to which I'm an expert or anyone's an expert on these topics is questionable because it's so
We're
emergent.
all learning. Yeah, we're all learning. No pressure.
Yeah, we're all learning. To me, one of my favorite types of things, if I think about where am I using it, because part of your question is where should organizations start? Well, I'm a smart person. Where have I decided to start? I think about the massive amount of time that I or folks on our teams would spend doing research just to find case studies or examples of like how organization does X or Y or how they've done this, especially now that we've gotten better at being able to validate those kinds of things as they come back. I really like that. But I think what stepped up my game more than getting these kind of one-off answers to things was when I started using, for example, Claude more within my council of AIs. And Claude in particular, I think does a really good job building tools. I don't even use it really for anything where I care about a specific answer. I care about building a model that I can use later on. So let's say this is the kind of report that I want to deliver to a client. I don't want your help building this specific report. I want your help building a tool that builds this report. And now in every client engagement, we use this tool, this tool, this tool, this tool, right? And we have this kind of consistent way that we're building and delivering things. So I do think there's still an underrated element to the degree to which people are using AI for discrete individual tasks, one-off, versus like building tools, I think is big. And then I mentioned the idea of the biggest, most strategic future casting challenges that like having different AIs help you with that. Think about any successful CEO who's ever existed in your industry, any successful company that's made it in your industry, and now being able to build some AIs that think from those perspectives. So from the perspective of this CEO, from this board chair, this company, imagine that I wish I had a coach who was an executive at X company for 40 years. Okay, I do have that now. I don't know. Those still feel fairly like primitive though. I wish I had a bigger, bolder answer. Like what's one of your favorite answers you've heard so far? What do you think are some of the bigger things?
Well, I'll tell you my thoughts first. So the reason I also said I don't think productivity is like a good lens or measure, paradigm, whatever you want to call it, is because I think a lot of really good examples of using AI, like the one you just gave, where you're essentially building agents, or you can call it tools, whatever, to gather insights for you to then deliver some kind of value to a client, to me it's insights and reflection. And the same way that I think it's really beneficial for things like performance or coaching is because you still at the end of the day need human coaches, but what you can do is scale, and it solves 80% of the problems, which is most people write their goals in a terrible way. It's low quality. They write their reviews also in a terrible way. And so throughout the process, it gives people reflection of, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? If you use it in the right way, you could also, to your point, say, I want nothing to do with this. Please draft it for me. And that's a very transactional, low value task. And so I don't have a favorite answer that someone has given, but I think when people give examples of where in the loop, it helps them give a different perspective and gathers insights or data, whatever you want to call it, to then do the thing you're really good at. Like you're really good at diagnosing and going into companies and helping with culture or leadership, whatever it may be. It helps you get there. You're not replacing the last 10 meters, you're replacing the first 90. I think often people are still in this very premature, I have, chicken and pasta in my kitchen, and what recipe can I make? I don't know if that's the best way we should be using AI. This can be just search on the internet without using so much energy. But what it could help people with is, I'm about to go into this situation. Can you give me a perspective that I haven't thought of that might help me show up better at work or in my personal life? And I think that's what you've described. But I'd be curious, like, what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, really quick response on the coaching one. I was just with a CHRO of a 60,000 person biopharma company, and we're talking about coaching, and they're rolling out one of the many popular AI coach tools for people lower in the organization and then human kind of people higher in the organization. And she's like, oh, but I worry about, do people feel these people get a human coach and these people only get AI coach? I think it's about reframing of what if we're going from a scarcity mindset of coaching, of coaches are scarce, very few people can get coaching, you can only have a general coach for whatever, to abundance coaching where you can have the world's best coach at every subject at every moment. Give me that over the human coach. I work with a coach, and like coaches are valuable, but like coaches are valuable for a very specialized, specific thing. And the idea of moving to this abundant coaching mindset where how do people not have 40 different coaches working with them on different things? If you don't, you're definitely not maximizing your potential. And so in a world where coaching is abundant in the workplace, it's just such a different way of thinking than we've thought in the past.
I love that. Coaches for everyone. So as we start wrapping up, I guess one thing that you would like the audience to be left with in terms of cultural traits, organizational cultural traits that we should protect and emphasize and amplify as more and more AI becomes part of our vocabulary, as more decisions are being delegated, more activities, workflow, whatever you call it. What is it that is going to be continuously and perennially important for organization to preserve?
Well, who did I say at one point can change the culture? Anyone who chooses to. Exactly. So yeah, it wasn't a trick question, but like anyone who chooses to. So if you're listening to this podcast, you've already made so many amazing choices. You've chosen to be curious about this industry. You've chosen to get to hear from thought leaders like Stella and Donna and those who they bring together. And so you can choose to change the culture, and you can choose to say that it's not going to be a they problem. And well, I'm only a this and I know this. You can say, this is something that I want to do. So my strong encouragement to anybody listening would be to really think about what is a reality right now in our culture that I don't like? What's a reality in our culture right now that I don't think is serving us for the future? And then what might I do to address that? What could I do that could start to change? And spoiler alert, there's always an answer to that second question. The answer is never, there's nothing I can do. And if you can't think of one, call me, send me an email. I can help you think of something, because I guarantee there are things you can do.
You mean it too. We're going to put your email, so don't worry.
And I mean it too. Yes. And I'm not going to charge you for it. I'm going to help you do it, because the best culture change happens when you decide to do it and you make it happen internally.
Isn't it ironic? Because you're saying we should all become agents of change. And yet there is all of this agentic workplace that is entering the vocabulary and is ruining the meaning of the word agent and agency.
It's true. Last rapid question before we end, Steve. What are you reading, consuming, listening to, obviously, besides the Workestration podcast? Anything that is of interest to you? It doesn't need to be AI related, but that you think listeners would benefit from.
Yeah, on the AI front, big Ethan Malik fan, his Substack. Met Ethan a few times. I go to this local AI salon in Denver. Really cool. We get together like every 2 weeks and just talk about what's going on in the news. One person comes and does it under the hood of, here's the thing I built, here are the tools I use. So seek out local things as well. Other stuff I'm reading, just read this book, Hope for Cynics, which has been having me think about the pandemic of negativity that we live in these days, where I think people are overly performatively negative about their work and about workplaces. And, oh, well, this, and, oh, thank God it's Friday. And as someone who's always genuinely enjoyed my work, I wonder why people feel the need to be so negative about their work sometimes. And this gave me some language for that and maybe some hope. And I'm working to try to be positive and a positive role model for stuff in 26 as well, even though I might have come across cynical or snarky in some parts of today, which means I still have room to develop and I can have a coach.
We can get you 40 coaches.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Only 40.
To start with.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for joining us. It's been a pleasure and we really appreciate it. And we will share where you can find Steve and Cultivate in the show notes. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Steve.
Bye.
The Workestration podcast is an exploration in the evolving world of work, driven by the fundamental questions: where is work going? How can we make it better? And how do we get there? By engaging with diverse perspectives from doers, builders, shapers, the podcast aims to provide a comprehensive understanding of the future of work.
You've been listening to Workestration, hosted by Donna Scarola and Stella Lupashor. Music by Philippe Visitiu. Everything else we're doing ourselves because someone has to walk the talk on lean operations. Find show notes at workestration.ai. Follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If this episode sparked something, leave a review or share it with someone trying to solve the same problem. Want to be a guest? Book time at workestration.ai. Thank you for listening.